All right, Megan, just a test. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Great. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll just call the Stewardship Subcommittee meeting to order. I will just kind of help facilitate through the agenda items. Really for Councilor Mendez and as Councilor Riley gets here too, just some background on this committee. This is a group really focused on partnerships. So the topics tend to include items in the council goal work plan related to the environment and climate, our what had been kind of our shared prosperity goal or economic development goal, as well as partnerships with the Human Rights and Equity Commission, Neighborhood Leadership Alliance. So the community building subcommittee tends to focus more on codes and technical work. This is more on the partnership, public involvement side of things. And we typically meet every other month. It's been a while. It's taken us a while to get this group up and running, partly just because the council has been so busy with goal setting and the special meetings involved in doing that. So I think we'll get on more of a regular cadence here moving forward. So our agenda for today, we'll ask for an approval of the minutes. Then we'll talk about tree preservation code, specifically the public involvement aspect of that. As we had a full council presentation, we want to go a little deeper with this group around public involvement strategies. We'll continue to update you on the downtown use of transient room tax dollars for a project. We have conducted a neighborhood assessment. We want to share the results of that with you. And then we'll end with the water reclamation facility or sewer plant. We're updating the long-range plan for that project. So that's on the agenda today. We've got 2 hours scheduled. I don't know if we'll need the full 2 hours to get through it all, but I'd love to entertain a motion for the minutes if they've been posted to the packet. This is just accepting them. I know that you might not be here. That's okay. You can still vote on minutes or accept the minutes, even though you're a brand new group.
Good morning, everyone. I move to approve the September 26, 2022 meeting minutes.
I will second that.
Any further discussion?
All those in favor? Yeah.
Okay. Aye. Please raise your hand and say aye.
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 Great. And then typically this group, I should have said too, you're making more recommendations to council or general discussion. Think of this more as a work session format. There's very few sort of votes that you would take as a group other than just sort of accepting minutes. All right, so next up is the public engagement options for our tree preservation code. And online is Pauline Hardy, who's going to, oh, you're here. Surprise. And so this is where we are looking for some direction from this committee on the approach to public involvement. Obviously, the full council would approve, would have some involvement in really setting the parameters for this. So that would come to the full council, but your input would be really helpful in keeping this moving forward.
Morning. Morning.
I'll let Pauline do most of the driving on this, but this is a follow-up from the March 15th full council work session on revisions to the tree regulations, which are contained within both the Bend Code Title 16 and within the Bend Development Code. So, and this is in particular to talk about the community outreach and public involvement portions of this project. So Pauline.
Thank you, Colin. So as Colin had mentioned, and good morning. I'm so frantic to say good evening since he's seen me at night. Good morning. So as Colin mentioned, this is about talking about how to engage the public with the upcoming tree code update regarding tree preservation. And we did meet with council on March 15th and went over the current codes that we have in the Bend Development Code, the Bend Code regarding tree preservation. And council provided some high level direction to staff regarding the update. One that we are going to look at revisiting the tree preservation code when it comes to applying it to large scale developments. And then to look at protecting possibly larger trees, similar to the codes that we went over for the Southeast Area Plan. And then while we are doing this, to make sure we are balancing tree preservation with housing at the same time. The council requested staff to look into a formation of a committee. And so today, the committee that staff is recommending for council to consider for this type of code update is the Council Temporary Committee. And this committee would be approved by council resolution. And in that resolution, you would identify the task specific for this code update and the timeframes that you're looking for the proposed update. And then this committee would make a recommendation to council when it was done. The scopes and responsibilities, as I mentioned, would be established in that resolution. So it gives staff some parameters to work within, which is very helpful. It is subject to public meeting laws. And because of that, all the meetings, like most of the committee meetings, would be open to the public. And we're looking at doing it online and in-person meetings. And although the committee makes a recommendation to the council, in the final decision by the council, you can either accept the committee's recommendation, you can change that recommendation, you can propose stuff, go back to the committee for additional review, or take a completely different action. So they're just simply making a recommendation to council. Meeting with staff internally, we thought a appropriate size for this type of committee would probably vary between 11 to 15 members. There's some suggestions on committee members up on the board for this group to consider. The first two members would be representation from city council and a planning commissioner, but they'd be non-voting members. They would just participate in the discussions and attend the meetings. Then our various city committee representation, staff felt a member from the Community Rights and Equity Commission would be appropriate. Definitely from the Environmental and Climate Committee members, from our Affordable Housing Committee, and then from our Neighborhood Leadership Alliance Committee. And then other potential members staff thought would be appropriate is definitely an arborist, a representation from an affordable housing developer, production developers, possibly two types of production developers, one that tends more to save the trees, one that tends not to save the trees, a commercial developer,
I'm gonna label them that way, but
a representation from a neighborhood association, a staff member from the Bend Park and Recreation District, maybe some members from community organizations. And this is just what we came up with. There's probably others. So if you want to add to that, definitely do. And then staff support would definitely be from planning, engineering, our code enforcement department, fire department, legal, and then others as needed, we can pull into the meetings. This is a tentative timeline with the goal of having this adopted possibly by the end of the year. So right now we're working on the committee selection and approval, go to council with a resolution, work on that the rest of this month, which is halfway through, and May, and then start committee meetings June through September. And then public outreach would be September and October. We always hold a planning commission work session. So the work session and public hearing would be October, November timeframe. And then with city council's first public hearing and then the second reading, tentatively like November, December timeframe.
just so I'm being really clear, so planning commission has a formal role in this because it's related to development code?
Yes. So they'll make a recommendation to the city council. Oh, there it is. And then, so next steps would be following the.
So we'd get some input from the committee before it goes to the planning commission. The council would back and forth, and then there's something formal would go to planning commission, and then that comes to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've done in the
We're
past,
appointing this committee to
where we
advise
could
us.
probably have a work session with the committee once they've sort of concluded their recommendation, just to make sure that we're on the right track. So we don't want to have to hold a public hearing
Yeah,
in front of the planning commission on codes, and then come forward and say, well, you missed the mark.
That's fine.
So we just want to, we'll bring forward a check-in before we send notice and have a hearing. in front of the planning commission.
So right now we're in the formation of the committee. And in that resolution, you can either as a city council identify those committee members, or you can delegate the appointments of the committee members to the mayor and or city manager to identify the actual members. But in the resolution, you definitely want to identify the makeup of the committee, the specific tasks, and then the timeframes that you recommend staff work under. So the city council would adopt the resolution or approve the resolution. And once the committee is finally selected, we would go back to the planning commission just to give them an update, because they are city's citizen involvement committee, to make sure they're informed on the proposed amendments or proposed code update, the committee members, and then also for them to select one of the commissioners to be part of the committee.
And just a note on something Pauline said about the possibility of council in a resolution identifying slots on the committee and then delegating the actual filling of those slots to, for example, the city manager and the mayor. That is not the way it always works. But if council chooses to do that, it will make this process more efficient, because it would forego the need for a bunch of interviews with councilors or a council subcommittee. So it would expedite the process if council wants to do that.
Could we formally say whoever is going to be the council liaison to the committee could also be part of the group? It's
Yeah, that's fine too.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, so that was it. And as you can see up here too, just under the time frame, we do have a box there that talks about next council committee check-in. So as Councilor Riley was saying, you know, as we work through with a committee, maybe we do a couple check-ins just to make sure we're on track with the process and the code amendments that are coming together before even a draft is completely out there. So I can answer any questions for you, and I can go back to any slides that you would like.
Could you go back to the slides with the suggested makeup? So I really like what you've described here. And I think the one thing, actually, if you go back one more slide, I think to the goals, and this might speak to the scope. Sorry, one more slide. Yeah, I think one thing that I also remember council discussing that might be useful to put in there in terms of some of the goals is the idea of potentially increasing citywide tree canopy. And I don't know if that would be accomplished through a fund to support replanting or something. You know, if a homeowner or a business says, hey, I've got a spot for a tree in the right of way, is there a city supported method or track that they could, you know, get some support on that? Just to the concept of, you know, net expanding tree canopy, I think was discussed and would probably be a welcome criteria as part of the code. And then the other thought was just in terms of the numbers. I mean, I like the going back to the identified expertise seats. These are really great and I think important perspectives to include. And I think I would be okay with the numbers. My only concern is whether 11 to 15 is too big and unwieldy. But if you feel like that's a manageable number, then I think I would be okay with it. And I would be hard pressed to say, well, if it was going to be fewer than 11 and 15, you know, which perspectives would we say are the most essential ones to include? I think that might be worthwhile, but I think otherwise this looks very good.
We started as staff with like 9 to 11. And then we started adding all this up, and it was like, it was really hard. So we would definitely, I mean, I think we're okay for a smaller committee, but we were as staff having a hard time with like where you would slim it down. So if you want to go there, we're open to that feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any way to really cut this down. I think it's a great group. I think it really checks all the boxes of what we're looking for here. And I'm fine for efficiency's sake of us saying here are the categories of people we want, and delegating that responsibility of who that specific person is to either the city manager or the mayor.
I think it's not as big as CTAC. But
Is that the baseline? Or is that what
Yeah.
I will share that I will share that during the discussions, as staff were figuring out what's manageable, but what's sufficiently inclusive. At some point, I may have said this is starting to feel like. But as Eric said, it was challenging to not have it in this range.
Well, maybe one question is how distinct do we feel, we've got 3 kind of developers on there. How distinct do we feel that their expertise and perspectives are?
Yeah, there might be some efficiency there. I mean, I think there might be one that ticks a couple of boxes, so maybe that's where there's some flexibility and shrinking this down
Maybe
to-
that might be one area to look at.
I mean, you
Yeah.
could say up to X, right? Or yes, yeah, if it's 11 to 15, that's the right.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's better for us to get buy-in earlier and not, we are truncating the timeframes, right? And trying to stick to that. So, and buy-in may not be the right word. It's better for us to get a full perspective and have an opportunity for people to kind of wrestle with some of the stuff as a group, even if there's some points of disagreement, like we couldn't come to agreement on this one. There's not enough time. That's part of our job. I think it's a little better for us to have more of that up front and not end up in a situation where at the very end, we've got 5 issues that didn't get identified and you have to slow down. We'll probably run into some bumps like that anyway, but I think the bigger ones, probably works.
Okay.
I think the other thing I was going to say I agree with your points, Councilman Mendez's points about the scope and adding in that increasing the canopy. The other thing that has been talked about, and I don't know if this needs to be explicit, but the idea of some sort of inventory, like what's the role of an inventory, and to help us understand, what's changing and how are we going to increase the canopy? How do we know it's increasing or decreasing? Like, I think that needs to be part of the discussion somehow. It may not be the primary focus of this group, but at least staff making some background research on that. I've been seeing a lot of email recently about a variety of funding streams to help with both implementation of this, but also the inventory kind of approach. And it seems like that could also be part of the research around.
We have explored some of that. Pauline, do you want to just give an update on?
So I met with the Oregon Department of Forestry last week, and they have a program, and we're going to set up a meeting with staff to go over it with them. It's my understanding it's a free program. It's just having been as a candidate to be able to use it and have staff that can implement it through the free program that they have. So we are going to explore that opportunity. I did get a link, I believe it was from the Ben Bolton this week, of a bend tree canopy program that's already available. How exactly accurate it is, I'm not 100% sure, but it does have the entire city with percentages of trees. So it gives you an idea anyways that we could use. And then there is a grant opportunity that I've been exploring as well. City of Austin has an amazing inventory program that touches so many different areas of how trees affect values and equity. And it's a really cool link. I'd love to share it with you. We go that far.
So what I'm hearing is we'll amend the scope to add the language about tree canopy as well as just inventorying. I think they kind of go hand in hand. And what do we have now versus looking towards a code to build something in that realm. And then we'll add the council liaison as a part of the process to select committee members. And then I think as the full council, we'll come back in the resolution. We'll ask for that decision about who from council probably would make sense for one of the 3 of you to play that role, since we're proposing using this group as a checkpoint. So just put a bug in your ear, but we'll take care of that when we pass the resolution, or we bring the resolution forward to you. I think that was it. That's anything?
So next step would be
The resolution
we'll work on
coming
the
to council.
resolution, and then probably first meeting in May, we should be able to bring a resolution. We'd shoot.
I think
for
we'd
that.
shoot for
Yeah.
the first meeting in May. And if not, it'd be the very next one. So in May.
And this is different than the SDC one. We didn't formally appoint anybody, right? I'm not sure if that got.
No, this would be, the resolution would be, we want these seats, we're delegating
Yeah,
the who to liaison, city manager, mayor, maybe, and then here's the scope of it would be outlined in the resolution. And then we would go through some sort of process on finalizing that committee, bring it back to the council just to let more for visibility of who's on it. And as we've said, all those meetings are publicly noticed and
And their goal is to draft something for us.
Correct.
So it is different than the SBC, just kind of listening in, but
correct.
Yeah, I would say that we'll spell it out in the resolution, but the goal would be to come up with elements, concepts,
Yeah,
objectives,
necessarily.
and then we'll work on the drafting.
yeah, yeah.
I will help.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is, I'll provide a little bit of background. This is a topic that has come before this committee and the full council to designate the use of transit room tax dollars that were held in abeyance as we worked through some legal challenges. We were wanting to adjust the percent that was allowed for discretionary use, the transit room tax dollars that were for discretionary use. That we were not successful with that lawsuit. But we have since changed our code to allow broader use of transit room tax dollars for tourism facilities. So the intent was to focus this investment on tourism facilities, and what we've had several conversations with council with the idea being, let's focus them on the downtown area. So what we're here tonight, I'm doing the same thing this morning, really, to talk to you about is really the scoping of that, further scoping of the use of those dollars. And again, looking for some just general direction from council on our plan here. So I'll turn it over to Ben.
Yeah, and as always, Eric kind of scooped me, which is great.
Sorry.
We can kind of skip some slides and get to the real conversation. And Eric teed it up really well, but I think, before I jump through that, I think one thing that came up in the last week was there was some interest from counselors not in attendance today, my peers, around interim solutions to kind of fill the gap and address some safety concerns on Brooks Alley and Brooks Plaza in the next however many years or months before we can do a more transformative project. So Toby is back there, and David, they'll be able to jump up when we kind of get to that point. Although Toby, you can come up now if you want. Stay back there. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but whenever you talk about tourism funds, you kind of have to at least mention why we spend money on tourism promotion and now tourism facilities, as Eric mentioned. So there is a state statute that says if you collect a lodging tax in anywhere in Oregon, you have to allocate 70% of that tax to tourism promotion and facilities, and you can keep the other 30% to the general fund. Now, we have a very advantageous rate, largely because most of our lodging tax or room tax, 9% of the 10.4% we levy, has been present in Bend for I'm not sure how long, a very long time. Bend was having tourism promotion kind of rallies and stuff back in the 50s. If you go and look in the bulletin. So this is our current rate. The breakdown, we'll be back before you to talk about the Visit Bend business plan and how that 35.4% is allocated and will be deployed in the coming year, I think on June 7th. So here's where the twist is, and Eric mentioned it. Between 2017 and 2022, we were sidelining some funds, went through some legal challenges around that 4.2% that had been allocated to tourism, and if it could be used for something else. Ultimately, in 2021, end of 2021, council chose not to move forward with further appeals around those challenges. So we ended up with $2.36 million that had been sidelined the entire time. We hadn't spent them on anything to be used for tourism, something involving tourism. They had restrictions. And here are those restrictions. Tourism promotion, you can only use the funds for tourism promotion or tourism related facilities. I'm certainly not going to read the definitions from the statute, but what this really says is you can do what Visit Bend historically has done, or you can build tourism related facilities. Item A under there, very self-explanatory. Excuse me. Item B, not so much. Real property, useful life of 10 or more years, substantial purpose of supporting tourism or accommodating tourist activities. That's a pretty broad definition, and I think you're seeing that play out as Visit Bend is investing in, and actually Central Oregon Visitors Association now as well, are investing in tourism related facilities across the region, everything from looking at the COVA Visit Central Oregon allocations that came out today, everything from a commissary in Warm Springs. Visit Bend invested in the Spoken Moto move, right, which generated some headlines not too long ago. But no definitive definition on what a tourism-related facility is.
Ben, was there were about 15 years ago, if I recall, there was an advisory opinion that came from the state about trying to explain that what tourism-related facility means. It also was not totally cut and dried. Has there been any other advice about how to interpret that?
I don't think so, and I'll let.
Yeah,
Ian, I will defer to you on.
yeah, that-
legal questions.
yeah, that was an opinion from, from, I think, the State Attorney General's office, because somebody asked, and I've read it, I don't know, a dozen times or more over the years. You're exactly right. It provides some guidance, but did not establish any real bright line rules. I'm not aware of any subsequent or more recent updates or refining of that standard, if we can call it that, that was set way back when. So we're still in a place where we can look at this and trying to figure it out can involve making some judgment calls and sort of, I'll be honest, kind of testing the waters to see how people feel and what the comfort level is with some ideas that are out there. That's kind of where cities are at with this.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add, this is really where Visit Bend, and Kevney Dugan wasn't able to be here today. It's been kind of our partner in helping to vet any ideas, right? Whether there have been sustainability fund ideas or certainly this going forward. Does it clear that ill-defined barrier for what is a tourism related facility, and also is the industry behind it? And does the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association have any concerns? That's where Visit Bend, I think, can partner and kind of help make sure we aren't heading down a path that we don't want to be on. We've had one discussion, maybe two discussions, but we've had one recent discussion with the Stewardship Subcommittee back in September of 22. You can see the direction from the committee there, and the decision points were really around, do you want to keep these funds in-house and find a facility that we can invest in as a city? Or do you want to, I don't want to say offload $2.36 million, offload, right? But do you want to invest these funds through Visit Bend, through a facility grant or something like that? The decision from the subcommittee, or the direction from the subcommittee back then, was to really hold the funds for a tourism-related facility project in the downtown core, work with Visit Bend, of course, as I alluded to, and then to really prioritize the Brooks Promenade corridor and the Mirror Pond Plaza. It's something Councilor Mendez, I think you and I met a long time ago to kind of chat about. And you can see the key components to consider there. We have a North Mirror Pond parking lot that is ready for reconstruction at some point in the near future. So how does that align? Tourism funds wouldn't be able to pay for the actual construction, but as we talk about things like restricting or managing access along Brooks Alley, that comes into play, circulation through there. And then really the plaza, I think an enhancement and expansion of the plaza is the cornerstone kind of foundational tourism asset that we are investing in and expanding. And this is a good picture that kind of shows what the Mirror Pond Plaza has become, even in the time I've been here at the city, really a de facto gathering place for downtown events, keeps those events off the streets, and yeah, continuing to grow. Anyone that's been down to the farmers market recently can attest to how busy it can get. And then just some context before I turn it over to the folks that are kind of going to shepherd this project through. This slide was shared back in August of 2021 with council as we were talking about the Hawthorne crossing. You'll note that the Hawthorne pedestrian overpass isn't going to be built in a vacuum. We need to find ways to connect and have landing points on both ends. We certainly see improvements at Mirror Pond Plaza, improving that interaction with Drake Park, the start of downtown on the west side, but also maybe an initial start point for improved connections all the way up. And we've had interest both in front of council and with stakeholders downtown in managing access along Minnesota, right? So can this kind of be not a pilot, but the first step in kind of managing access and having time limited deliveries and pedestrian kind of gathering places in the evening, maybe. So with that, I will turn it over to John and Ryan to kind of maybe talk about the scope of it.
Go for it.
All right,
Yeah.
great. Well,
Good morning, John Condon, Project Management Office. So we really wanted to focus on a variety of areas, and the plan here is to hire a consultant to really help develop these ideas. Right now, there's a lot of thoughts floating around of what we could potentially do. So the thought is to bring in a consultant to really start evaluating these and looking at, what we can do with the money we have, what are some of the challenges, constraints. But like Ben mentioned, obviously the Mirror Pond Plaza is going to be a top priority to start looking at how can we improve that connection to Drake Park, as well as Brooks Alley, and then even into that breezeway that connects to Wall Street. Looking at Brook Street, and we've sort of separated that into three distinct pieces. There's the south portion of Brook Street from Franklin up to the plaza. Right now, there's no vehicular parking off of the alley. Still very critical for deliveries to those businesses, but a little bit different makeup there. The north of the plaza up to Oregon Street, some of those businesses do have parking off of that section of the alley, so maybe a little bit different approach there. And it's been mentioned possibly a synergy with that north parking lot and the redesign of that. How can we leverage some traffic flow through the parking lot or the alley to get some more parking out of that parking lot. And then looking at also north of Oregon Street all the way up to Newport, enhanced pedestrian installed across Newport. So looking at how can we possibly leverage that to Chiefs River Trail improvements to use that to bring people more into the plaza in Brook Street. North Mirror Pond parking lot, and then just looking at how do we improve public facilities throughout that area for all the events that are taking place. So obviously the city owns the Raymaker building where the Commons is. Is there an opportunity to leverage some of those facilities to enhance what's already happening with farmers markets and concerts or other events in the plaza? So in a very broad spectrum, those are sort of the areas we're going to focus on. Again, bringing on a consultant to really look at each of those and come up with some options, ballpark prices, and then we can start building what are the priorities, where do we want to focus our efforts and the funds we have available. Do you have anything to add, Ryan?
Well, just as a reference point, you can see this is a great image here of the South Mirror Pond parking lot. So that was a project that was completed a couple years back. And there are some priorities in working with the police department, with parking division. And so that was a project we completed a couple years ago. The cost of that was about $650,000 in total. So that's just a good reference point if we're going to consider doing the North Mirror Pond lot in context of the total budget we're talking about.
Given the costs involved, is there ever discussion of kind of the return on investment, $650,000 invested in the parking lot and versus, how much economic activity is generated by the plaza itself, which is relatively small? Is that ever discussed? The idea of kind of what's our return on investing our public money here?
It's a great question. Yeah, from an engineering standpoint, no, we haven't evaluated that.
There was a project a while back when we were looking at Mirror Pond in partnership with Parks. It's a very different council at the time. We're looking at maybe is there a better use for the parking instead of having parked cars right next to the river? What about a redevelopment effort? What would that look like? That sort of vision never really took hold, and I think that's not something that we've put on the table to revisit. We just made the investment on the north or on the south Mirror Pond parking lot, but it is a city-owned property. So I think long-term it could be something that's looked at, but that wasn't scoped.
Both lots are city-owned.
Both lots are city-owned.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of a bigger vision, even included in theory to the north along the river, some of the properties in there and sort of a tax increment finance kind of approach, right?
Okay, this is just a blow up of that south parking lot that Ryan mentioned was just recently reconstructed. The plaza red line is more or less the limits of the project. So looking at the alley, you can even see from this aerial photo, a lot of those businesses that front the alley are using that, I think under permit for outdoor dining. And then,
John, given that the south parking lot was just recently had a pretty major investment in it. What's the idea? What's on the table, and what are you thinking in including it in this project area?
Yeah, I think as far as the parking lot itself, very minimal, if anything. I think it's more, how do we, enhance the connections, improve, security, just more to make it tie into the rest of the project. But yeah, I don't see us touching, I think it was, pavement was reconstructed, trash receptacles, lighting, everything was improved as part of that project. So I really don't see this new project as touching that parking lot other than at the fringes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, unless there's any other questions. Yeah, please.
Can I ask a quick question just on that, Matt? Like, is ownership, the city ownership of the promenade and like, or the plaza end, right where the stairs go down, is that all park district to the west there, or what?
This line is.
And how much do we have influence over versus a different jurisdiction and
This line
complexity
is
of
a
that?
pretty good
Red line.
example. It gives you a good idea of where our actual property line is. If
Mhm.
you were to go down to the plaza, you can see the cobblestones kind
Yeah.
of go off the plaza quite a bit. And then there's an asphalt path that starts, and
That's
what I read
roughly.
is that's the property line right there. So when we talk about the plaza, it's not just kind of polishing it up, right? But it really is how do we make this a bigger,
Yeah.
more robust gathering space. Maybe something that other cities have even put in kind of sound walling, things like that to kind of make sure that they're having a concert across, in our case, the river from the neighborhood. I'm not saying this- I'm not necessarily promising this is gonna be a big concert.
Yeah.
It's more, those are the kind of enhancements that other communities have put on plazas.
Hey, Ben, I can't hear you.
Sorry. I don't know when I stopped.
Done talking.
Yeah, I kind of wrapped up. Sorry,
He
Council.
said he wanted to put a big concert. venue.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just highlight too, I think this is a great photo to illustrate. We've all walked down this stretch of Brooks with a delivery truck sitting there, and it gets tight, right? It's not comfortable, it's loud. And so that's one of the things we would consider evaluating. There's a big bank of utilities in that green strip between the parking lot. So we could consider, what we might be able to do with that space. It might get expensive, but again, that's why, as John noted, we would hire somebody to kind of evaluate that for us.
Between the cars.
Evaluate what? I'm sorry, I missed it. So
Shown there between the parked cars and the actual Brooks itself, the alley. There's a big bank of utilities down through that stretch. So it's being utilized pretty efficiently today, but that is something we could consider in terms of how it interacts with the parking lot itself. And then I'll also note, credit to David Abbas's crews. They were out there not long ago in the plaza itself, fixing some of the pavers and some of the other things that have been there for a while. So we're maintaining this as best we can, and enhancing some of that, putting in some artistry work and some fishes and some other stuff through there. So we're maintaining it as best we can to meet the current needs, which are definitely different than what Ben has described as future needs.
Are there opportunities on the north parking lot to also do utility? Is it the same thing? Is that a utility
Absolutely, yeah.
zone
I mean,
there?
Excuse me, you can see that on the screen now, and
Yeah.
and there's also a big bank of utilities in that space between the parking lot and
All
and the
like
alley.
6 foot,
Mhm.
roughly 6 foot
Yeah,
wide.
electric
Just
vaults
walking there.
and pedestals, and everything else that you see.
But again, this is a parking lot that would be under consideration for, potential redesign, reconstruction. I think there's an opportunity to improve some of the trash enclosures that are used by the neighboring businesses. That was done in the south lot. Just looking at, again, how do we efficiently, get the vehicles down Brooks Alley that need to be there, either for deliveries for the businesses that are there, but also improve it for pedestrian access and events. And then, as I mentioned, potentially even moving north of sort of where that pedestrian zone ends, where the pavers are, up past, Pine Tavern and Mid Brewing. How do we potentially enhance those sidewalks? They're pretty narrow through there, and just create a good flow and connection to the plaza.
And the pedestrian crossing at Newport, is right there at Brook Street?
It is.
So just to throw out some high level concepts in terms of a timeline for what this project could look like. So the crew's working on a charter right now, putting a draft scope of work together. Depending on guidance coming out of this meeting here, to move forward or not. As John alluded to, we could look to getting a consultant on board here sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. There's obviously a good amount of outreach that's going to need to occur. This is going to be highly interesting, I think, from a community feedback and standpoint, as it should be. And so we'd work through some processes there. Hopefully be back in front of you, 9 months from now or so, talking about this is kind of some initial concepts based on public feedback, based on some, truthing of that and some high level cost estimates. And then really looking for that direction and guidance and saying, yep, we like this plan, we like this idea, let's proceed with that. And then we would get that design finalized and ultimately get that packaged together like a traditional project and get it out to bid for construction. Really, trying to be cognizant of council goals and council timelines. Our internal deadline would be to try to get this thing done and built within the next biennium. So depending on how complex it gets and how much outreach we do, that would be our internal target here for ourselves, is try to get this done underneath the current council guidance.
I think the last slide, really, Toby may want to come up for, or if you're fine back there, but really, this was through talking with David Abbas and Toby around, and a couple of counselors, as I mentioned, around what can be done in the interim to address some, I think, growing safety concerns along Brooks Alley. Toby, you will need to come up here because I know some of the talking points, but and you can see the next steps, but I would like to touch on Toby to touch on the loading zone project, I think would be useful.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's really funny because we talk safety and I went down last night because I wanted to measure when we came up with this interim effort thing. And I was almost run over by a car that went the opposite direction. So I was like, yeah, great. So I think there is a way to tie this into this loading commercial fleet and loading zone pilot program or demonstration project that we are working towards. Don't have a real timeline for that yet, but basically as downtown is very busy, we are really observing more and more trucks at different times of the day parked how they shouldn't, blocking Brooks Alley at times is blocked completely and you can't go through there with a car for 20-30 minutes, especially if there's a concert. Then we have a bus there and then you have loading vehicles next to it, so it's a mess. The same is happening more in Minnesota and all the other alleys on Lava. And so we're working towards creating or to measure what would happen if we create dedicated loading zones in downtown that we can measure with cameras, with sensors. We can actually get the data picture of what's actually happening in those. Brooks Alley is part of that. So if we would want to move forward with an interim solution, I think that could be beneficial and there could be some nexus between those two projects. We could do this fairly bare bones. We could buy off the shelf collapsible bollards that we can install. Our parking enforcement contractor, Diamond Parking, could probably open, close them every afternoon. We could potentially talk with the DBBA if they are maintenance person that comes in at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning, could open it up again. So we could test this partial closure if we wanted to, which might be actually beneficial and informative for a larger project to see is it actually a need? What's actually happening? So I think that's that.
Yeah, and I would just add, if we were to pursue some kind of temporary infrastructure upgrades, if you will, we do have some downtown kind of planning dollars set aside through the American Rescue Plan Act funds that would probably use to fund this. Just to be clear, the bigger project, I mean, the holistic improvement, we're using tourism funds, but the kind of these ancillary improvements need to be tied to that bigger project. So we wouldn't be kind of building the retractable bollards right now or something like that. This is kind of a stopgap.
Is there any, would just some signage help in terms of, especially visitors and people who aren't familiar with the road? You don't think that's going to make?
We already have signage. So we already, on the north end of the alley, there's a do not enter, one way. I think we have a sign on the south end that says authorized vehicles only.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So I think it's I as much as I want to say, yes, signs are great, and they are, right? They have a purpose. But I think in this case, it's just, especially in the summer when we have a lot of tourists, it's just getting a mess
And
sometimes.
are people mostly coming in from the north side Frank
Yeah.
getting at.
And then I think what happens too, and like, then the alley is blocked. And, everybody waits for 5 minutes, but after 5 minutes, they're backing up
Mhm.
and going the opposite out onto Franklin. And I think that's equally not a good solution. And one thing to keep in mind, and I think there was a earlier question about the economic value of the parking lots. Yes, it costs $650,000 to do the South Maripont lot. We now are very busy on those lots, especially during the summer. So I think they generate probably about $2,000 a year per space in revenue, which on the South Maripont lot is about $175,000. There's an economic value of the actual parker attached to that too, right? Because they're parking there, they go and spend money in downtown. So I think we should keep that in mind. I think as it gets busier in the summer, the pedestrian traffic increases also from the lots into the alley, into downtown. And I think that's something where like some of the businesses are not concerned about that. Some are very concerned about that. Like when you talk to like Rick at the Beach House Deli, he's probably tell you like, I want to jump out there and like rescue people sometimes, right? And I know I sound dramatic, but it's probably not as bad, but you know what I mean, so.
So one of the challenges that I've heard from some businesses is, of course, the needs for deliveries are varied. Sometimes you have a small delivery, sometimes you have a really big box truck that's going through there. What are the thoughts around, given that the lot is only 10 or 12 feet away from the alley, is there the possibility to reconfigure some of the lot space to say this is going to be a designated loading area? Maybe some of the parking is reallocated, but the benefit is that the alley is really kept clear.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. And I think you all know, I'm never worried about too much about like, do we reconfigure a parking space? I think we can make this up somewhere else. I think the challenge with larger vehicles on the lots is the turn radius. That is just like a certain size truck you can get in there. Larger trucks, you won't be able, they get in, but they won't be able to get out. We already do 15-minute and 30-minute curbside, like to go pickup spaces in both lots. We have those in the south and in the North Maripont lot. We started those during COVID. We're working with the businesses along the alley for the farmers market to do a couple more dedicated loading and pickup spaces so that we can compensate closing the alley. So all those things I think are feasible and it could be done. I think we could entertain the idea of having like on the South Maripont lot and in the center aisle, like a drive-through loading zone or something like that. You go in on the right route, but I think it's limited to a certain size of trucks. And that's, I think, why we hope to do that project where we can actually measure how many vehicles of what size for how long do we actually have, right? Because I think then we could make a much more informative decision.
That sounds good. So what kind of input are you looking for?
I was gonna say, I think we're just looking for general direction on the idea. So far, are we on the right track? Before we get things too solidified, this is just a checkpoint. So if there's something that you've heard that gives you concern, we'd like to hear about it. Otherwise, I think we would proceed as we've outlined here.
And I think I'd highlight this interim effort, which kind of came up in the last week as well. Is this something you'd like to see if we are looking at a 2 to 3 year project for construction?
Yeah,
Morning,
I love the
everybody.
idea
I'm gonna
of
jump
that.
in, yeah. Ben was headed there. I think two choices, the overall project over the course of the biennium. Is that supported and go? If the interim solution is of interest and desire, then we would, that's kind of a separate track in the logistics of it. Security was mentioned, we'd be re-engage the discussion with emergency services, ambulance, fire, on the interim and the long-term effort. And then just a quick comment, the one shown here, collapsible, just as an example. If those were collapsed though and still laying in the alley, I see a trip hazard. Ben mentioned, the automated or up, down bollards that could be hidden. Our climate, freeze thaw, maybe not the ideal, but that could be looked at in maybe the bigger design effort with the consultant team of what is the best tool. Interim would probably be something removable and flush with the level of activity out there in my mind from a trip hazard standpoint. And then it's logistics of who's putting that up and removing it daily, what days a week, what time. I think earlier efforts been, I think it was like 11
AM to 9 PM, what was kind of an option,
Yeah,
but if it's a desire of council for an interim, safety improvement out there, we would charge forward with working through those logistics.
I think short-term sounds great. I mean, I recognize the challenges of it, given that something more permanent is a challenge for deliveries, but having something to indicate that this is not a through street for people visiting who aren't familiar with the area seems really important. And also might actually end up helping with emergency vehicle access if it cuts down on some of the congestion and confusion in the alley that we currently see. So I think it sounds really good. Megan, Mike, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we just don't want to spend a ton of money on capital investments. So that would be very temporary, right? Because that's the point of this, is to figure out what the solution is. And I see a bunch of management challenges. So, you can work that stuff out. And I like the idea of doing some kind of learning over the summer around the commercial loading stuff. I mean, as a user of the Tower Theater, just occasionally, for example, we go in my business and it's interesting, just that part of it. You need access back there briefly, but it's a half-hour, 45-minute kind of thing.
Right.
And that, for that particular entity, it tends to be a certain time of day because it tends to be evenings and so much morning stuff. So it seems like learning there is important.
Councilor Perkins?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think I'm fine with this temporary approach. And I think that I would definitely leave it up to those who are in the know to decide what kind of ballards and how they would work with, best, to provide the most safe environment makes the most sense. But I think that we do need to do something temporarily. And as far as the larger scope, I'm hearing a lot about like the parking lot and this and that, and I would like to hear more and focus more on sort of how to make that more of a community space going forward, and how to make it more of a true promenade, not just a delivery street, and a place that both tourists and then locals can enjoy and spend time. I think the connection piece is really important. But it seems like the larger focus is more on parking and the parking lots. And I would like to see that maybe de-emphasized a little bit.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think once we actually have something to look at on the promenade and the plaza, it'll be, everyone likes talking about parking, right? It's easier to talk about the promenade and the plaza if we have some pictures. So
Also, I don't know if it was entirely clear, the 2.3 million that's reserved from the tourism fund really needs to be used. It should not be used on the parking lot. That would come from the parking fund. That is an enterprise fund. So parking needs to pay for itself. That's our philosophy. We don't subsidize that. And so the revenue that we get from permit fees or and those lots are, it used to be the 2-hour free, but now we charge right from the start. So that revenue from those is what's used to make improvements to those parking lots.
when I have said synergy project, it was more, can we leverage the reorganization or the rebuild of that parking lot in terms of how it's laid out and how it impacts traffic flow?
I think we've got to look at that zone where utilities are and at least get a clear idea of like what's involved and how much that's going to cost. I should imagine it's not a simple thing or a cheap piece, but if we could gain some more property there for use in the promenade, it seems to me that would be beneficial to the kind of the overall plan and have a better flow, at least for people walking when there are people down there. Assuming there's going to be some interaction of loading and unloading at some times a day.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Councilor Perkins said to really encourage you to think boldly about the best way to use this space, because ultimately, you know, the cars themselves don't really care that they happen to be parked in one of the nicest spots in town. So, maybe there's, especially as the city invests in alternative ways of connecting to downtown, maybe some of the people that are getting downtown won't need a place to park. So it would be nice to have that kind of reflected in the concept. But I think it sounds like there's some really exciting possibilities here. So I think it sounds great.
We will go forth and come back with ideas.
Thank you. And just one more reminder too, to make sure to speak in the mic for those that are on the dais, because we are just having some mic challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next item is an assessment that was done. This was part of the council goals for the current biennium to really look critically at our neighborhood associations
Can we do a
system.
quick- I need a potty break.
Oh, okay. You want to take just a quick few minute break and we'll get set up here while we're doing that? Okay.
structure. And then the neighborhood program assessment, which really assessed the neighborhood association program, where it's at today, maybe where some gaps are in its effectiveness and how we can look at those to solve. So My focus was on the neighborhood assessment, which is what I'm talking to you about today, but I do have Zavi Borja online with us today. So if you have any questions about the city assessment that he also completed in tandem with mine, he's here to help with those. So part of the methodology, I followed a human-centered design approach. So what we were trying to do is review the program, where it was at for the time, where it has been and come from through history, and then where we want to go in the future, and focusing mostly on the neighborhood association members and what they want these organizations to be for them, as we've shared that they are a conduit to our city council decision makers. So what I did was go through the compliance forms that we receive from neighborhood associations every year. That tells us how many people are coming to their meetings, how many meetings they're holding, what their structure looks like as independent organizations in our community. We looked at communications grant funding, how that was currently being used, how it's been used in the past. We looked at our program history, so where we've come from since 2001 when the first neighborhood was created. And then we also talked to a lot of model cities that have been where we are and are actually similar in size and makeup. We also focused on neighborhood assessment inputs, having a variety of inputs in this assessment. So on the board, these are the different assessments we used. The Neighborhood Leadership Alliance was used throughout the process to give them updates on what was happening with the assessment, what the process was going to be, what they could expect, as well as get input on what they thought some of the barriers were to neighborhood association success. We also talked to neighborhood association boards. So I went out to all 13 neighborhood associations and had brainstorming sessions with them about what's working, what's not, how they wish we could support them, and what they're seeing as maybe being some issues or barriers to people being involved with them. And then we also wanted general community input. So this was people who have no idea what a neighborhood association is. That is also people who are members of neighborhood associations, but aren't necessarily in a leadership role. And this was done through a statistically valid community survey that we asked basically perceptions on neighborhood associations. And then we also talked to council and staff. So we were at the Stewardship Subcommittee. We also have a variety of staff that work with our neighborhoods all the time on questions that they have or projects that are happening in their neighborhoods. So we wanted to hear how those relationships were working. And then, as I mentioned, Zavi Borja was doing a city outreach assessment in tandem with this, where he was really focusing on our community partners that are underrepresented and Spanish-speaking organizations, which ended up being a large part of that group.
Mikhail, where does that public perception survey live? Are those results?
Yeah,
posted?
they are. So I do have that, and I can share with you the survey results too. And I think I packaged it up for the Stewardship Committee last year, so they should have that easily accessible. So I'll get those to you. It is kind of interesting, I think, and I'll share this with the themes that came out. One thing from all of these inputs, these were the big areas that came through. And this was from, again, people who are very close to neighborhoods and people who have no idea who they are. We learned that there's areas with membership recruitment and engagement, for instance, a lack of awareness about neighborhoods. In that survey in particular, if they were unfavorable towards neighborhood associations, we would look at the comments, and for the majority of those comments, the comments actually led us to see that they were talking about homeowners associations. So there's some confusion about what neighborhoods are and what their purpose is in our community. They also need more community building opportunities and collaboration. So a lot of neighborhoods are working in silos. They are volunteer led too. So having more opportunities to come together and use resources in a shared way is probably going to help.
So do people think that neighborhood association was a homeowners association?
Yeah, that was the underlying theme in the perception survey that we put out there.
It sounds like the other way around, that maybe people thought the homeowners association was the neighborhood.
Yeah,
Oh,
right,
yes.
but I can see
Sorry.
both, right?
Yeah.
Like people who weren't involved in either maybe thought that that's what they were.
Yeah, for further clarity, I think some of the comments that we saw were, they told me I couldn't paint my house this color. They told me that I only could plant these certain types of plants, or it's overreach. And a lot of those comments were because they thought these neighborhoods were homeowners associations. Yes. Board operations was a big category that came up too. Our recruitment and retention is continually in flux, and this has been it's the issue with volunteer organizations, and it's always kind of been there even since they first began in 2001. But it has not gotten any better, and the pandemic did not alleviate that. So they also have said the asks and requirements from the city are too great. For your knowledge, we ask 4 things of neighborhood associations. We ask them to have one meeting every 18 months. We ask them to fill out a compliance form every year. We ask them to have open public meetings for their membership. And then we also ask them to, well, now I'm forgetting the 4th thing. What do we do, Ian?
Bylaws.
Thank you, bylaws. And open bylaws.
And to be clear, the requirement is that they have some, not that they are
A
specific.
certain way,
to
correct,
anything.
yes. So those are the asks that we have of them right now. I think what I found in my research is that the ask of having a land use chair for their neighborhoods comes with a lot of expectation on their own part of thinking, the city's ask of them is that they give us a contact so we can let them know what's happening in their neighborhood as far as development goes. What they would like to take with that role is as an educator for their membership. They want people to understand what's happening, not just to share the information. And that does take a lot more involvement and understanding of the land use process than most volunteers.
So we
would
do
have.
ask them to have a land use chair.
We do.
So there's a 5th, that really is a 5th department.
Correct.
Just-
And so then we heard that they need more tools to support board capacity. A lot of them are using free websites. We've heard that they wanted shared tools like Survey Planet. We're currently using Survey Planet right now as a tester for seeing how these shared collaborative tools can go, meaning we have one major account that all of the neighborhood associations are kind of sharing, I guess, and the cost is less, and we do training on how to use that tool. So it's helping the neighborhoods understand how to operate. So we're hoping for more of that in the future. And then city and council support. And I think that this was probably the one that I heard the most frequent from our neighborhood board members. They're feeling lately that the need for council and staff buy-in and support of neighborhood associations is so important to their ability to recruit and retain membership. A lot of the time they are out in the community and they're talking to people about joining their board or signing up for their neighborhood association. And they're saying, why, what's the benefit? And the neighborhood leaders have the feeling that it's because they don't have anything to point to say like, council listened to us when we asked for this project. And I think the neighborhood street safety program was an example of that they had been using for a very long time, that they were very proud of, and that they were able to say, we got those crosswalks in our neighborhood. And so having more opportunities like that really proves value to these volunteers. And then our funding structure is inconvenient and ineffective. And that is, we use a reimbursement structure for funding, meaning you have to have money to spend money on your neighborhood, and then the city reimburses you. And it is a grant process, but just needing that money up front makes it a little difficult for volunteers. So out of those themes, we, Zavi and I both.
Can I just make
Of
sure
course,
I
yeah.
understand that last comment? So there's no actual budget provided for the neighborhood associations. Any spending they do, the members of the association have to spend, and we reimburse.
Correct.
that
We have
correct?
guidelines on how they can spend that money. And if they meet those guidelines, they get the reimbursement, for example.
But they have to
Um,
front it.
They have to fund it, yes. Our city assessments, these are the combined recommendations. So on the left side here, you can see the neighborhood assessment recommendations. These we'll go into in the future slides, so you don't have to focus too much. The city assessment is on the right, so that is what Zavi was doing. And then in the center is how our assessments were bridged and kind of complement one another, and how we're really hoping to bring together our community organizations and underrepresented groups with our existing neighborhood association program in a way that's safe and fun and collaborative and builds community. So that's really like our goal out of all of this. And I will share these with you so that you can look into them. So the neighborhood association program recommendations, this is where I want to go into the recommendations that I have. There's 3 areas. There's completed and in progress. There are code changes, which I'm kind of just looking for a general nod. Yes, we agree, or any feedback that you have on those. I'm also going to be talking to you about a new engagement opportunity with our neighborhoods that I'd like a little bit of direction on. So to start out, these are the recommendations that are completed or in progress. So the low hanging fruit, so to speak. We heard that this was an issue while we were going through the neighborhood assessment, and we put in new changes to fix these things that we found. So updates to neighborhood association funding. Communications grant is now changed to a community relation or community engagement grant. That is because before we told the neighborhoods that the communications grant could only be used for communications type purchases. So that would be advertising, it would be mailings, it would be their events. So if they had anything to do with advertising their events and getting more people there. What they couldn't do is beautification projects, because we couldn't say purchase a tree for Arbor Day. That wasn't an approved use. We couldn't fund their supplies for cleanups. That's something that we've changed now. So the parameter, they can now have more of these community building events and not have to focus their funding strictly on communication. Reimbursement requests are now fully automated online. That was a process that they had to submit just via PDF or email. And so we're trying to have more efficient processes for them. We're looking at a new way of allocating funds in the biennium. So the way that we currently spend their money is, or spread out their money, is by tax lot. As we know, one tax lot can have hundreds of apartment units on it. So it's not necessarily by door. And now we are mailing by door as neighborhood associations so that we can reach our renters, businesses, pretty much everyone, not just the property owners in the neighborhood association. So that has.
You said by door and not tax lot.
Correct.
Okay.
You're shifting to that.
We've switched to that, yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then rollover funding from the fiscal year 22 was used to purchase a new community building engagement trailer.
But we're still in a place where we're requiring a reimbursement process where people have to spend the money themselves.
Correct.
And it seems to me that that is a bit of an equity barrier in terms of requiring that, upfront. So is there a way, I'm assuming that in the budget, there's X amount for the whole thing and maybe X amount based on this allocation for a particular neighborhood association. So is there some other way that they can access resources and not have to spend themselves?
Yeah, and sorry to look at you, Ian, but this might predate some of these conversations about how we reached the reimbursement structure. I'm not quite sure how we got there, but I'd definitely be opening into looking into more of a grant program. Oh, you were in my job before I was in my
long time ago, we had a whole office of neighborhood
Yeah.
association, for a number of support staff. And then in the recession, and I can't tell you which year, we really separated the neighborhood associations and made them more independent. And that's when we went to this grant program, because it doesn't require staff administration. So I'm sure we could change the system so that somebody like Michaela or myself pays all those bills that the neighborhood associations would incur. It's just an admin cost. So I don't know what the code changes would be required to make that happen, because it's written as a grant reimbursement process in our code now.
Yeah, I mean, it could be changed, would probably require code amendments.
So why don't we look at that? Because we're going to propose some changes to the code anyways to change the name. So I think that's good feedback that we can look at.
If there's some way to do that, it's got to not take a month and a half to get.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
that.
So the new engagement trailer, this is something that we use the leftover funding from fiscal year 22 to purchase. It was in response to the need for more community building within the neighborhoods and kind of a broader engagement goal for the city to be meeting people where they're at within their neighborhoods, to be creating spaces for conversation. So this trailer is a one-stop shop for events. It's stuffed with supplies. You have tables, chairs, microphones, your sound system, you have a barbecue, propane, pretty much everything that you want for a pop-up party. It's going to be ready for use towards the end of this month, actually, is what we're looking at. We have a new online reservation system. Because the neighborhood funding purchased this trailer, the neighborhoods are going to be the first to be able to roll it out and reserve it for their events. That's something that we can look at down the line. I think we wanted to start with the neighborhoods to see how it goes, how many events we're going to be going to kind of get a baseline for what we're looking at. And then it's a streamlined process actually for working with our partners over at Bend Parks and Rec to reserve a park. It was very hard to go through a deposit process and a certificate of insurance for the neighborhoods to hold these events. And that's all streamlined through this new reservation system. It also has a drop off and pickup service. So we're not expecting all of our neighbors to know how to drive a trailer. Someone at the city is able to drop it off before the event and pick it up after. And we are usually at those events as well. So
Some really cool.
Yeah.
I hope that we can paint it something
Yeah.
other than white, but.
Yes, yes,
think
it
it
is
sounds
currently
awesome.
being wrapped. So that
great.
is, I'll show you the image of the wrap at the end.
Very
here.
cool.
We're also offering added city support, so full mailing support. One of the biggest barriers for neighborhoods who are trying to set up these events was to work with a mail house, to get a graphic designer to put together a postcard. A lot of the times they just worked with what the mail house could offer them, and it was a really big barrier for people in holding events. So if that's something that we work with mail houses a lot already, it's something I can take off their plate. I'm more than happy to do that. So I've offered that. Another item is to restart neighborhood leader trainings. These stopped during the pandemic. They focus on technology and communication support. So April 26th, we have a Survey Planet training that's coming up. It'll be going back to the basics of like, how do we do websites? How do we do social media? That kind of support. City hosted engagement events. This will be a joint effort between Zavi and myself to do quarterly events that are in different geographic areas throughout the city. This would be something where we can just invite our partners to attend and they wouldn't have to do the work to be there, but could show up, and it would be a space to build community as well. We also know that with the constant turnover on neighborhood boards, we're seeing databases disappear with all of our neighborhood contacts. And so having somewhere centralized where people can sign up with their neighborhood is something that I would like to implement. And we are working on right now on figuring out what kind of technology the city has to be able to do that. And then shared tools and resources, as we've talked about. And then,
Michaela, can I just add something there? I think that this is really important. Mike, you were talking about equity, to ask a neighborhood association to, have someone who can create a website for them and, create this database and create, all of these things are for a volunteer. I think this will provide more equity among neighborhood associations, and it's not just the neighborhood associations and the areas that have people that have these specific skills that are able to be more successful. And so I think it'll actually help engagement in the long run. So I'm really glad to see all this.
Yeah, I mean, the two other things I could see would be some sort of website support, because I've noticed that I'm not sure if they're all uniform, relatively, they're not. And as a counselor, trying to understand them,
yeah,
different sites, it's interesting.
definitely.
That, and then, things like not SurveyMonkey, the other one, MailChimp, or those kinds of softwares, if we could have a centralized system, people can do their own detail part, but then the database parts. It sounds like you're going in that direction. That kind of infrastructure could maybe really help.
Correct. And it's kind of a line that you're walking between their independent organizations and then offering them these supports and tools. And so we're trying to be helpful partners in a way, and we've got some exploration to do.
The backbone idea, that backbone infrastructure, but they can tailor it.
Okay, so the updated council liaison system, this is one that you all know about. In the past, we hadn't had guidelines on the council liaison relationship. It was depended on the councilor's schedule and how often they could interact with their liaison groups. This year, we wanted to add a little bit more structure. So we've limited the current council liaison to attending only general membership meetings rather than monthly board meetings. You can attend those monthly board meetings, obviously, but that's not an expectation that neighborhoods have anymore. It also allows us to incorporate a biannual listening session that I understand council has been talking about and would like to do. So we'll talk more what that listening session looks like in just a couple slides. So there are 3 code changes or 3 areas of code changes that I would like to look at with this program. The first being to rebrand the neighborhood associations. We need to go into the code and change the purpose as well as some of the naming mechanisms. I think one thing we'd like to do is drop the association term. So these are our neighborhoods. These are neighborhood districts. These are, I think that will help with some of the confusion that we're having with homeowners associations, but that's not it. It's also an entire effort to rebrand what neighborhood associations are about. add a community building function. I think our current code really focuses on land use as being a neighborhood's role in city government, or being notified about those issues. And so going in and actually shifting towards a community building centered purpose is something that we're looking at. We're also looking at adding community building requirements. So right now I had said that we meet once every 18 months. That's required by our code. Most neighborhoods are meeting once a year. I think we should update the code to reflect an annual meeting requirement for neighborhood associations. And then also require a survey to annually be reaching out for neighborhoods to annually be reaching out to their members and asking what they think neighborhoods should be working on, what they think city council should be working on. When we were out doing, having board conversations, one thing that I did realize is that many of these neighborhoods have not been surveying their members. They're relying on input that's coming in through their shared inbox. They're looking at our social media and Nextdoor posts and what the buzz is on those, but not necessarily asking in a way that's a formal annual survey. So this could help with some of the representation. And then the third is to resolve neighborhood boundary annexation issues. Now, this is not looking at neighborhood boundaries as a whole. It is simply figuring out a fix for these annexed areas that are coming in quickly and have no representation by our neighborhood program. We don't currently have a system to do that. And some of our neighborhoods have said, we're too big, we can't take any more people. And some of them have been constrained in the center of the city. I think that's a bigger project, but we just want to look at these annexed areas, see how we can bring them in and help include them in our process. So for the code changes, those are the three that I'm recommending. Do you have any general feedback on those feelings?
I mean, when I think about the potential, like what are the city's goals for neighborhood associations? I mean, the biggest one is community building. And I love the trailer going around, having that option available. I've also thought about, do we need to have the ability for neighborhood associations to have a block party? I don't think we have that supported in our code. There's no way to say, let's have a block party. It sounds like some of that will be addressed by partnering and having, the ability to have an event in a park, which is great. Could you say, I'm a little concerned about, on the topic of equity, thinking about, could you say a little bit more about how would you characterize the diversity of neighborhood associations? I mean, I think Old Bend is probably the smallest one. And then I think Mountain View is the biggest one, at least in terms of tax lots.
Yeah.
But there's such a huge diversity in terms of size, but also I'm sure capacity. Some of them are not meeting, some of them can't recruit. What are your thoughts about is there anything that we can do to, try to be more equitable in providing that capacity to build community and hear from neighbors about their concerns? Because I think the biggest next worry would be that, we also think about neighborhood associations being accountable and representative. And that is a concern sometimes, that the people that we hear from are not necessarily representative, but they're very capable. And we're not hearing from the people that don't have the time or, are working multiple jobs and can't volunteer. So any thoughts that you have about the kind of the diversity of capability around them? And
yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that Zavi and I both came into this assessment process with was knowing that we have a gap between some of our underrepresented groups in our neighborhood associations. We started out the conversations with neighborhoods about what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like and how it can be businesses and property owners. It can be renters. It can be folks who live in the area and own homes. There's a lot of diversity within our neighborhoods, right? And I think that one of the things that the equity department is continuing to work on is this concept of equity mapping. And we are looking at equity mapping so that we can help neighborhoods better understand who's in your neighborhoods, because that's one thing that is missing, is kind of that general makeup. I think we can generally look at neighborhoods and say Boyd Acres has a lot of industrial area and businesses. That's a different makeup than our Old Bend residents who are at the center of the city, and it's mostly residential. Southern Crossing is kind of in the same boat. So there's a variety, I guess, of characteristics that each of these groups have And that have compounded, having a trouble recruiting volunteers because you're speaking not to homeowners in the area, you're talking to the businesses mostly. And I've heard this through our conversations. I know that they would like and have asked for a couple years now. The NLA has asked council to consider a general review of boundaries, excuse me, citywide, so that we can look at these issues and see what does make, I'm sorry, my voice is gonna go now.
Boundaries are hard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And they're emotional, and people identify with where they live. And so it is a very, very big project. If we were to look at a comprehensive view of what the city's boundaries are with neighborhoods, that's, yeah, a lot of resources. But I do think that there's merit in a project like that.
When was that last done?
It was when it was formed, which was like
Over a
in
decade.
2 decades ago.
Oh, wow.
The neighborhood association system was formed like in 2004
And this
or
was
5.
essentially the map.
Yeah,
this
that
is
hasn't
the
changed. It hasn't really
You can
changed.
see how it's grown organically, big on the outside.
Well, I think that's an important point because, I think if you, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of, I'll just think of my area of town, right? Summit West, right? I think if you ask someone, maybe in Northwest Crossing and someone in Valhalla Heights, for instance, or, Shevlin neighborhoods, like, do they share necessarily the exact same concerns? And do they feel like they're all part of the same sort of neighborhood? I would gather probably not, but they are, right? They're Summit West. And so I think that's important for us to look at going forward. Because I think your point's important, Ariel. These neighborhoods were established, these neighborhood associations were established, the boundaries, a long time ago. And does that necessarily fit how our community identifies anymore? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and I'll say, and Xavier, I know you're on here too, so you might help me with this too. But when we were going through it, we were working on figuring out ways and spaces to bring disconnected groups or neighborhood associations who generally are volunteer ran. They have people who have the time and the energy to do that. With our groups that we don't hear from very often. And I think a big part of that is this community engagement trailer. It's the ability to hold more community celebrations and open spaces where it's not your formal sit down and listen about a land use issue in your neighborhood. I think there's a space for those too. But bringing people together again, especially after a 2-year pandemic where people have kind of lost the ability to have discussion about issues that are facing our community and providing, again, those spaces for. And Zavi, do you want to speak to what your assessment had found in relation to that?
Yeah, hello everyone. Xavier Borja for those online. He, him, and I'm a community relations manager at the City of Bend. Yeah, I think through my assessment, one of the biggest things that I saw with partners was just this ability to just be. I think folks in communities, specifically underrepresented groups, really felt taxed and or extracted. In terms of just like, we always come to them for our needs, and whether that's a survey or feedback or input, even when and if it directly affects them, perceived or not, negative or positively in some way. So again, utilizing, I love the way the neighborhoods currently are, and as we do look at this annexation, but love how it's parsed out right now. We can be really intentional with who's in that area, who we're missing, to really invite those groups that we haven't historically heard from, to invite them to just be, right? And I think that was the biggest theme, was just somewhere where we can just be, we can meet together, to have casual conversations. To Michaela's point, we can have these, land use, issues or conversations or housing issues, and figure out where that is, but just being really relationship oriented and intentional with that, and providing that space. And again, meeting folks where they're at in their neighborhood, to then hopefully, I guess, graduate them into these other channels in which we have. But again, just providing and having that space to just be is initially the concept within that. And I think further, as we develop and implement this program, let's take I don't know, let's say Larkspur, and this may not be in there, but it's like working with our school district or with our Title I schools and dual immersion schools to really be intentional with outreach for those areas, and just being really creative in our mobile homes as well, areas to again be intentional with our invites for these events.
And we've seen that come up, and a few different ways. I think it's been neat to, as we learn more about the groups that Zavi, I mean, he had to go out in the city assessment to identify who is underrepresented, who are we not hearing from, who's not at the table. And as he's been able to do that work, we've been able to say, you know, in Orchard, you have a huge group of Spanish speaking individuals within the makeup of your community. So it probably makes more sense for you to be translating materials than it does in other neighborhoods. So it's starting to inform our outreach, but it's also allowing us to learn and, just like Davi said, I think be the way that we are as we're trying to form these connections, which can take some time.
Could you remind me of just the 3 code changes you're looking at? The means to incorporate newly annexed areas, looking at support with cost, the reimbursement model, and the branding, or?
Yeah, so we brought up the reimbursement model, so that will be added to these 3 suggestions. So that's not on here, but the rebrand. So we're looking at the purpose and the naming mechanisms for neighborhood associations to include more community building. We're adding a requirement to meet annually and to survey annually. And then we're resolving the annexation areas.
Say that the second to last one again.
Sure. We're requiring them to meet annually rather than every 18 months. And we are changing it to include an annual survey as well.
Are you looking at ways, and given that some of the feedback was also that the city's requests are somewhat burdensome, are there opportunities to reduce that burden, or?
So at first we started with 2 meetings annually. And the thought was that we would do a community event where it was more like fun. And then we would do a business meeting, which the neighborhoods have traditionally done. Looking at the budget constraints and their ability as volunteers, that wasn't feasible. So we scaled it back to this 1 meeting annually, and then adding those meetings that Zavi and I are planning on working on, that'll give them an additional engagement opportunity within their neighborhoods. And so we're trying to meet them in that.
So sort of like, we're going to say, we're coming to your hood ideally in May, where you want us to show up, right? That's above and beyond their annual, but we're taking
We're
effort to make that happen, really. They just help spread the word. It seems like those backbone functions, you know, I just think that they're going to help the stuff you're already starting to work on, which is fantastic. And just how do we build that out to better support people so they have some of the tools, and we can give them some training on how to use it, and they can tailor it to their hood.
Correct.
The other thing that's coming up for me is just, you know, if we're talking about code stuff, and I don't know enough about this really yet, but the purpose of the Leadership Alliance, the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance, should we be talking and thinking about that as well? Does that need attention as part of this process?
I think there is an item in the council goals around looking at all of our advisory committees and being in a continuous evaluation of them. So and NLA is part of that. So that's kind of in the next biennium.
And I think there's one more slide. I want to do a time check, Eric.
A couple more minutes.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
So the last thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I've been speaking to Mayor Keebler about this because she's the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance liaison. And so she's agreed to continue working with us on this project, but I wanted to just put this in front of you, that biannual engagement that we've agreed on as part of the change in the council liaison system. There is we had first talked about those as being a roundtable format. And I think as I talked to the mayor and we looked into what other cities are doing, I wanted to share with you a format that Salem has used for these events, or these similar events. They actually do quarterly check-ins or listening sessions with their neighborhoods. And this is kind of like the outlay of what we've been thinking to date. So this is not solid by any means, but the location would be alternating venues. So it would be taking place in the community. Maybe we go to Larkspur Center one day, River House the next, or something along those lines for the listening sessions. We would invite neighborhood board members and then also the community at large. So we could have a list of people who want to be included on these types of invites like we do with many of our other public meetings. We would also focus the topics. So one thing that the neighborhoods have asked for is the ability to talk to council about a neighborhood directed topic. And so being able to meet, and I can do the work beforehand with them to say, what do you want to talk about in the upcoming session? They could tell me, we could arrange some sort of a presentation or materials for them to see about that topic. I would say we want to limit this to what our council goals framework is, so that it's not just any topic ever. It actually is pertinent to the work that you're doing. We would also have a question and answer opportunity, and I can see those as being very like interactive. We could do small groups with the counselors in attendance. We could do it in many different ways. And then for situational things, when there is the ability to maybe make some change based on the topic, enact that roundtable with the neighborhood chair at the end of those listening sessions. So really an all out, you're getting a presentation about a topic that the neighborhood wants to hear about. You have your counselors there. You are the neighborhood leaders and can hear the discussion by other people in your neighborhood. But in the end, you're going to be sitting there and talking to council from from a representative position. So that's kind of what we're thinking about right now. And again, I can continue to work with Mayor Keebler on that. But if you have any thoughts initially that you'd like to suggest, I'm all ears.
I think it's awesome. That's my thought. I love this idea.
This at least once a year in each neighborhood.
Yeah, so it would be twice a year.
Twice a year.
And so we could do east-west, we could do north-south. I mean, it's kind of up to you on how we do that.
Not in each neighborhood twice a year.
Correct. No, it's twice annually.
Sort of more broadly, and if there would be a couple neighborhoods that are invited to one.
They would all be invited, I think, but I
Across the
can take
community,
that feed,
okay.
like if you would prefer to just focus on certain neighborhoods, we can do that. That's something to talk about.
I mean, I think it sounds good. It's, I think the general thrust that I'm getting here is the city is looking at ways of deepening its engagement with the neighborhood associations and providing support. I really liked what you said about supporting outreach and working on things like databases and emails, and the support for websites was mentioned by, I think both Councilor Perkins and Councilor Riley, which I think is also a good way to serve these neighborhood associations and build the capacity. And some of these listening sessions, I think, will show how important the input is, and hopefully demonstrate what potential board members or members feel like they're getting for their time. But I think I'm most excited about the party trailer. I think that sounds like a really great community building tool, and I'm really excited to see it. I mean, I think this all sounds really great.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if it's better to say, well, this one's going to be focused in the neighborhoods in this part of town to help kind of narrow it, or not. I mean, it's restricting other people's ability.
Well, I think we want to see what the topics are,
Yeah.
because some of the
Yeah,
topics
you
might
just
be
have to
more
learn.
geographic. And so we'll just sort of learn as we go and keep it a little bit flexible.
Yeah. Just going back to the NLA, I mean, what is considered the formal relationship between the NLA and the neighborhood associations and their boards? Is supposed to be representative of them? Is that?
Yeah, so the idea is that the neighborhoods recommend someone from their neighborhood to sit on the NLA, and there's one from each neighborhood association, so there's 13. The intent is that those people are coming into the advisory meeting, they're learning about what we're currently talking about the city, that they're bringing that information back to their boards, and then it's being disseminated to members. I think the assessment did show us that that's not happening, that there's a roadblock in between. And so we're trying to still figure out what that is, and maybe how we can, I guess, support them better in that fluid, like conduit of information, if you will. But yeah, at this point, that's their expectation. I think that we're still, as an NLA, relatively new committee and trying to find our way. I know this upcoming year, after we do these changes or make these changes in the code, the NLA wants to sit down and revisit their mission, vision, values, and say, are we doing what we need to be doing as a committee? Because and are we all on the same page of what our purpose is here? So those conversations to come.
So they're supposed to mostly be a communication information conduit.
Yeah.
Not a body that makes some kind of recommendations, or that has some additional authority, or.
Right. And I think the intent is, and I've talked to the mayor about this, that with all of our boards and committees, really look at how they're serving council in terms of helping to implement some of the council goals. Because the more focused they are, I think, and the better. And if it's two-way though, right? Some of those committees have developed work plans like the Human Rights and Equity Commission. It gives them the focus, the councils endorse those items in the work plan in your council goal. So this is like this expectation that's been set. There had been some of that with the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance in the past, like the establishment of the Neighborhood Street Safety Program. Just, I think some land use education as well. But I think we need to, I think, revisit that focus and look at the council goal framework that for the next 2 years and say, maybe there's some items there that we really want to provide to the NLA to give them a little more focus.
And we're not creating like something between the council and the neighborhood association. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think that's with all of our boards and committees, they really are there to help serve council. They're committees of council. And so they really work best when you're utilizing them to their fullest extent versus some other body that, is disconnected. So.
Here's your wrap picture. So this is kind of how we envision the neighborhood gatherings going forward. Lots of community, lots of opportunities to interact and give back to your neighborhood. So
on the bottom of the screen is the
Yeah,
actual
yeah,
wrap.
the
Yes.
wrap.
yes, that's the wrap.
Yeah.
Great. Thank
Thank
you
you,
guys
Michaela.
so much.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think there's a lot of good stuff.
It's a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone. Great job, Michaela.
Thanks, Avi. The last item, and we can probably make up a little time here. This is just a brief update on the water reclamation facility plan. The reason why this is coming before the Stewardship Subcommittee is that we really see a big environmental focus on this work and how we potentially could reuse some of the water. And we want to see a lot of involvement from our Environment and Climate Committee. A little different than the collection system master plan, which is the pipes that take the sewer to the plant. That will be overseen by the community building subcommittee. That is more of the technical public facility plan, more traditional kind of land use infrastructure. We decided to pull this one out because of its potential for environmental benefit.
Thanks, Eric. So perfect. Ryan Ostergen, Engineering Director. With me today is Jason Sir, Principal Engineer over in EIPD, as well as Dade, who's our Project Manager. And they'll dive into this a little bit, but the intent on the conversation here over the next 15 minutes or so is really the focus on the communication plan. We'll be back in front of council and in front of this group with some more of the technical items related to the facility plan update out at our water treatment plant. But this is really focusing primarily on communications and whether or not the subcommittee agrees with our approach on how to engage with council and the public. So with that, I will hand it over to Jason.
All right, thanks, Ryan. You stole my thunder for the first slide, so thanks for that. We'll wait a minute to get Dade in the presentation. Like I said, since he's doing that, facility plan update really could be like a master, is thought of as like a master plan for the facility. So a facilities master plan. So this is what we're doing is that guiding document for the WRF or the water reclamation facility.
I think you're grabbing the screen instead of the window.
Yeah. Let's try this again. Mm-hmm. Was it that? Those presentation. Apologies. We'll get there in a sec. Go ahead. Yeah, hold the presentation there now. Now try to do that. Sorry about that.
Great.
There we go. So yeah, so as Ryan said, we're kicking off the facility plan update project. We will be coming, hopefully coming back to this committee to talk more project specific technical details, but really at this time, we want to focus on the public involvement approach or communications plan. The communications plan was attached as a supporting document for subcommittee review or consideration in advance of this meeting. So it is appended there. As I said, the facilities master plan is really just the master plan document that the city has at the water reclamation facility. And where master plans are really a dynamic long-term planning document that are supposed to guide the city from a conceptual standpoint to provide a framework for the growth or the development within the city limits. Master plans should be updated every 5 to 10 years, depending on the growth or the changes that the city experiences. And ultimately, a master plan will give the city some consistency with decision making. So hopefully those same principles can be applied project to project rather than having one-offs. A couple of master plans that the city has currently in place. The most recently adopted one was the Integrated Water System Master Plan in 2021, the TSP, the Collection System Master Plan in 2014, and then this is the Water Reclamation Facility Plan. The most recent document we have out there at the plant was in 2008. So we are well past that 5 to 10 year mark, and we're say overdue for a facility plan update. The upcoming master plans that we do have, the CSMP, as Eric mentioned, we are proceeding forward with that project. That is one that hopefully we will have an RFP for consulting services advertised next month. And we will be going to the community building subcommittee as our advisory board for that project. Other ones are the water reclamation facility plan update, this one that we're talking today, the water filtration facility, and then the stormwater master plan. So we are being very deliberate on how we are and when we are releasing these RFPs to make sure that we are getting the best consultants to complete the work. Speaking to the 2008 facility plan that was most recently completed, it really broke down the plant into two different categories. The one is the liquid phase treatment and the other is the solids phase treatment. The findings in that plan really on the liquid side was to increase the volume or the capacity for our processes out there to handle the growth that we were to foresee and we have experienced over the time. On the solid side, really need to increase the facilities or add facilities or modify them in order to deal with the increased solids loading that we are seeing from the makeup of the wastewater. Since the 2008 facility plan, we have completed two major projects out there. On the liquid phase side, we did complete the capacity improvement project in 2020. That was the big project that we had a lot of additional facilities added. And then most recently in 2022, we did on the solid side, complete the solids handling improvement project. Currently, we have a flow into the WRF of 8.5 million gallons per day, and there is a design capacity of 11.9. And while the capacity is a number, there are regulatory requirements for each process that we do need to make sure that are in compliance. A quick little vicinity map of the WRF. It is northeast of the city of Bend, about 6-7 miles. Head out Highway 20 up Palvia Highway. It is a couple miles north of the Bend Airport. In that little insert there, you can see the effluent ponds. That's where our treated water goes and eventually settles into the aquifer out there. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Dade, who's the project manager for the FPU, the facility plan update, to talk a little bit more about the project in of itself, the facility that we have out there. But once again, we're really trying to hone in on the communications portion of the upcoming master plan.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. So real quick, just wanted to provide you guys an update or an overview of the treatment facility, since this is kind of the crux of our presentation. Just some of the major processes that we have out there. And I'll kind of do it in flow order, be it brief. And if you want any more information, you guys can definitely reach out. But we collect that wastewater from the city into our influent pump station. We use pumps to then pump that up to our headworks, and that's where we screen the wastewater, remove any trash, debris in the waste. We send that to our primary clarifiers. Those are where we settle out the larger solids. That transitions over into our aeration basins where we use microbes to convert the nutrients and organic matter to solids. We settle those solids out in our secondary clarifiers that supernate, or what's settled to the top, the clear water that's sent through our effluent treatment system, which is UV disinfection, and then ultimately terminates out into the effluent ponds. The solids that we collect in the secondary clarifiers and the primary clarifiers, we send that over to our anaerobic digesters, where we convert that to biosolids and send that to our drying beds. And then that's taken by farmers and applied to farmland. The gas that's generated from the digesters, we use that in our boilers, and then we flare the remaining portion of it. So for the facility plan update, we've got a couple of objectives here to achieve that goal, the primary goal of the 20-year planning horizon. And so what we'll do is we'll be incorporating updated land use assumptions and population growth forecasts, and that'll generate the loading projections to the facility. So the actual organic matter that's in our waste stream. We'll evaluate the existing infrastructure, do a full CT scan of the facility, look at all of the concrete structures and buildings to make sure that they're up to par. We'll consider concepts identified within the Strategic Energy Management Plan and the Community Climate Action Plan. So there's several things that have been outlined in both of those documents that would pertain to this new facility plan update. Some of them being just using electrical efficient pumps, reusing our digester gas in a better manner. We'll develop a new capital projects based on past project and emerging regulatory requirements. So as Jason pointed to, we are permitted through the state. We also have other impending regulatory requirements too that may not be in place at the time, but we want to check those boxes off. And something like that would be like PFAS, biosolids, land use, things of that nature. And then all of this will then be supported by current rate strategies. So some of the deliverables.
There'll be a rate evaluation.
We do 20, 30-year rate models for, and the rates for capital that are, the rates to support additional capital would just be factored into that, along with our collection system master plan. There's many inputs that go into
The
the
rates
plan.
might be updated based on whatever the capital
Correct.
needs are.
Yeah.
So a couple of deliverables from the facility plan update. The main ones is there'll be an updated water reclamation facility plan, an updated treatment public facility plan, and then a new 20-year WRF capital improvement plan, which again will be supported by that rate model. Recommendations for the capital improvement projects will support beneficial reuse programs and climate action and resiliency plans. We'll be using a consultant to help support this. And as you can see on this schedule here, we're meeting with you folks today after we get the head nod, the okay from you as serving as our advisory board. We'll start working on initiating a contract with that consultant or issuing an RFP for a consultant. All through this, there'll be public involvement scenarios, touch points with various focus groups, yourselves, and other stakeholders.
I'll just add in real fast here. We are going in parallel with the collection system master plan. So there are, I'll say, forced coordination points between the facility plan update and the collection system master plan, with the ultimate goal of the two projects come together to deliver one CIP or a single sewer CIP. So that would be up for adoption. So there's a coordination aspect between these two master plans. So they will be supportive of one another, and the rates will support all sewer related requests.
The new graphic for our goals.
Yeah.
Dave, could you just mention it briefly? You mentioned PFAS and can you say a little bit more about what the goals are around those are the forever chemicals, right?
Yeah.
So what are the issues there that we need to be worried about?
So I'm not entirely sure that I want to classify it as issues. I mean, it's obviously like a kind of more domestic issue within the United States, but more so, we're obviously collectors of PFAS, these forever chemicals. They're latent in everything we use day to day, from traffic cones to your carpet, things of that nature. So as we collect that both in our solid and liquid, we want to be mindful of how we're disposing of them. and making sure that if there's any type of technology out there to reduce their input into the environment, that we're assessing that during the facility planning phase. There's really no regulatory requirements out right now. There is some interesting things coming forward with drinking water, but on the wastewater side, there hasn't been any guidance given so far. There's a lot of work groups and stakeholder meetings that we've been attending and listening in on, and how these PFAS could be destroyed long-term, or how you, as a treatment facility, a community, could reduce them either through source control. So at the source, what could businesses do, homeowners do, or can we treat it, collect it at the larger treatment?
So the facility collects it, and then what is the city doing with them now?
The PFAS, it's just kind of inherent at the moment.
It's in the liquids and in
it's
the
in the system.
solids.
And the EPA requirements that are being discussed now are pretty extreme. And I think that's the common thing you're getting back from most municipalities is it almost seems untenable to reach that mark of getting zero. But we'll see, right? I mean, we had to go through something very similar up at our water filtration facility. That's why we have a membrane treatment facility now to treat cryptosporidium. So the EPA is doing their job. They're identifying these hazards, and we'll see what comes out of that. It may trigger through the facility plan and EPA requirements the need for a large, expensive treatment facility out there that we currently don't have today, but that's to be determined through the planning efforts.
We're being stuck with the responsibility of dealing with this stuff that's being produced somewhere else and showing up in our waste stream. We just figure it all out at the local level.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one more example of a producer not taking responsibility. Anyway, but it does, I mean, it's an interesting, I guess it's federal rules mostly, right? I mean, these are generally driven by federal rules, and the state may be delegated authority to oversee it, but it's essentially a federal rule.
There might be some local benefits, though, to how we handle them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Right.
Very early in the
I mean,
process.
But much like the recycling system, we just finally are getting producers having to help pay for some of the responsibility of dealing with the end problem that largely has been delegated to the local governments to deal with, right? And they haven't had to pay.
Cool. Yeah, that was a good discussion. So some goals of our public involvement will be to engage, educate, and inform the community. We'll leverage our water reclamation facility concepts developed and adopted from previous plans and projects. So we have that current infrastructure, that investment, and how can we best leverage that going forward. We'll stay in alignment with council goals, primarily with the environment and climate and transportation and infrastructure. And then we'll use the Stewardship Subcommittee to formally consider staff recommendations and provide some guidance. And this is why we're here today, is the public involvement strategy. And this is the WRF Facility Plan Update Project proposes to use the Stewardship Subcommittee to serve as the advisory board for project direction and input on key project decisions to shape the future of the city's water reclamation facility. And moving to that, we'll bring to you key topics, and these aren't limited to these, but we'll want to discuss at these various meetings and touch points: beneficial reuse program and climate action and resiliency plan support, flow and loading projections, sewer utility rates, and treatment strategy confirmations. So speaking to, like, if we do find something with PFAS or another nutrient, we would bring that and discuss that with you on how we propose to handle that with treatment technology. For the communication tools, we'll mainly be using the Stewardship Subcommittee. Again, this is the treatment facility, so there's not a whole lot of folks surrounding that, neighborhoods, things of that nature, but there will be focus groups, dischargers that make up a large portion of our treatment facility that we'll eventually have communication with, as well as the touch points with the collection system master plan. But these are the communication tools available to us, and we use them as we need. For the public involvement schedule, we're here today, April 2023, to talk about this communication plan. We'll move into an RFP for a contractor, a consultant to come on board. Once they're on board, we'll get that kicked off and start working on the flow and loading projections and holding a workshop with the Stewardship Subcommittee. In winter and spring of 2024, this is when we'll present the capacity and condition assessment. That's where we'll have completed our scan of the facility. We'll have assessed the influent loading and how that's going to impact the existing infrastructure. At the completion of that, we'll start developing project developments, proposals, and recommendations, and have another sit down with you folks to talk those through. And then on an ongoing as needed basis, we'll use those communication tools for the public. And in the spring, summer 2025, we'll move to adoption of the water reclamation facility plan, as well as the PFP. So if there's questions for us to answer
How
now.
and where do you see involving the environment and climate?
I think they've been
In terms
involved.
of the
Yeah, and I think there's opportunities. We have the environment and climate kind of tied to this group as well. So as we present
Yeah,
to this
right.
group, I think the intent would be to invite members of the ECC, or there might be some direction you say when we have this
We want,
discussion,
like,
we want
you
you to
to-
come back or go to the environment and climate committee.
So you'd be
further
looking to
options.
us to provide a little
Yeah.
more of that direction. Okay. Seems like there are some good opportunities for them to be involved and do a little bit more work.
And there's a lot of ongoing work happening right now in terms of some of the programs that our utilities department is involved with and how we handle stuff out there today. So there's some side projects and some stuff happening in the background that will feed into this as well. So
Like
that's
the
good.
solid discussion of
Exactly.
that whole piece.
I think it sounds like a good plan.
Ready, so I guess-
Megan?
Yeah,
anything
Megan,
from
I
you,
don't-
Megan?
Agreed.
Well, there'll be many more touch points, so we'll just kind of keep on going, and we'll come back to you as I mentioned this fall. So,
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is one of those things where I focus a lot on transportation, which everybody experiences very viscerally every day. And something like water reclamation and treatment is, you can tell by the location of it, it's super far away. It's like, as long as it's out of sight, it's also out of mind. But super important work. Really appreciate you coming to present today, and happy to support it.
It's one more poop committee. from my part, So it just sort of.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our meeting today, right at noon. And so we'll look to, again, get it on a regular schedule about every other month. So expect a meeting sometime in June.
Actually, sorry, we
Oh,
already have
May.
preset scheduled meetings, so the next one is May. This was supposed to be in March.
Okay.
And we got pushed that by 2 weeks.
Have you sent out calendar invites for those already?
Should have already, but we
Think
will.
so?
We'll
I'll
make
take a
sure.
look. If I haven't, I will.
When do you think the next one is? I'll just double check.
Let me look. I can look right now.
May 22nd, Monday.
Okay.